Our journey begins at the island town of Lindau on Lake Constance. We then head west past a series of dramatic castles before arriving at the spa town of Baden-Baden. From there it is east past the city of Ulm and then southwards towards Füssen and on into the Bavarian Alps and a series of fantasy castles. At Oberammergau, we head east to Lake Chiemsee, before heading further east into the Alps and on to Berchtesgaden and a dramatic house on top of a mountain. Running roughly along the middle of Lake Constance is the border between Germany, Switzerland and Austria. In Germany the lake is called the Bodensee, and on this island is the ancient Bavarian town of Lindau. It was only joined to the mainland in 1853 when the causeway was built, which enabled trains and carriages to get to the island. This was followed by a new harbour and Bavaria's only lighthouse. In its history, the town has belonged to both Austria and France, and it was only in 1955 that it was finally returned to Germany by the French. Every year since 1951, there is a Nobel laureate scientific meeting in Lindau, where prize winners interact with young researchers from all over the world. It was only in the middle of the 19th century that Germany, as we know it today, came into being under the guiding hand of Otto von Bismarck. He unified a series of independent federal states into one country. This was also a period which saw German Romanticism become a dominant movement, and one of its most visual symbols are all the castles, rebuilt in a romantic medieval style. This is Sigmaringen Castle, once home to the princes of Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen. It has its roots back in the 11th century, though what we see today dates from the 19th century. It was built to impress and became a meeting point for the rich and powerful nobility of Europe. The deep-sided valleys with rocky crags gave castle builders an excellent vantage point to site a fortress, and later in the 19th century rebuild them in a romantic style that looked back to earlier times. Perched on this crag is Verinvag Castle. There's been a castle on this site since the 12th century, but what we see today dates from the 1830s, when the princes of Fürstenberg inherited Verinvag and began remodelling it into this amazing construction. One can only imagine how hard it must have been for the men who had to build it on this high crag over the valley. Since then, the castle has suffered a fire in the 1890s and even an earthquake in 1911 when a staircase tower and some of the battlements suffered cracks and falling masonry. On the other side of the valley is Wildenstein Castle. Begun in the 12th century, what we see today still includes some parts of the original. A narrow bridge joins the stables and ancillary buildings to the main castle on its rocky crag. Castles come in all sorts of styles and sizes in this part of Germany, and many are perched on rocky outcrops with wonderful views. However, this small castle cannot compare to another 20 miles to the north, which is one of the great castles of Europe, and one that can be seen from miles around. Sitting on top of this near 3,000-foot mountain is Hohenzollern Castle. It was built by Frederick Wilhelm IV, King of Prussia, starting in 1850, and it took 17 years to complete. This is another good example of a German Romantic movement castle, built on an enormous scale. The style incorporates the idealized vision of what a medieval knight's castle should look like, though it's doubtful it ever really looked like this fairy tale version. It was also designed to impress and enhance the reputation of the Prussian royal family, who could trace their roots back to the first castle on the site in the 11th century. In 1423, Hohenzollern was besieged for a year and totally destroyed. Only written records tell of its existence. 30 years later, it was rebuilt, and then over the next 3 centuries was occupied by various different countries, including the Austrians and later the French.